The back of the community center gym, the old Marine rested one hand on the cracked leather sheath at his belt. He had carried that knife for more than 70 years. He had carried it through rain that turned roads into soup, through ship decks that smelled of oil and salt, through nights when young men learned that courage was not loud. Then a self-defense instructor, half his age, pointed a plastic training blade at him and said, "Sir, that antique belongs in a display case, not on your hip." The room went still. Elias Mercer did not move. His fingers only tightened around the worn handle, slow enough that almost nobody noticed. Almost. Darren Cole was the sort of man who entered a room before his own name did. Tight black athletic shirt, expensive shoes, a headset microphone wrapped around his jaw. Even though the gym held barely 30 people, he taught civilian defense seminars for corporations, neighborhood groups, and anyone willing to pay for confidence by the hour. His language was polished. Threat angles, reaction windows, dominance posture. Everything had a name. Everything had a package. Elias had come because the flyer promised coffee, conversation, and a free morning class for seniors. He was 99 years old. Most days his house was too quiet. His wife had been gone 9 winters. His son called every Sunday from Arizona. The rest of the week Elias spoke mostly to the tomato plants behind his garage and the woman at the pharmacy who still called him Mr. Mercer. So he put on a pressed gray shirt, shined the old brown shoes he could still reach if he sat down first, and walked to the community center with the small, steady patience of a man who had learned not to rush what time had already taken. On his belt was the knife. Not because he expected trouble, not because he wanted attention, because some things are not carried for use. Some things are carried so the dead are not carried alone. It was a U.S. Marine Corps Mark II fighting utility knife, the kind most people called a kabar, whether or not Kabar had made it. Stacked leather handle, a steel pommel dented at the edges. A guard with tiny scars you would miss unless you knew where to look. Near the base of the blade, under the old patina, a faint wartime stamp still remained. 1944 Elias had never cleaned it bright. Bright steel belonged in catalogs. This knife belonged to mud, canvas, salt water, and silence. For the first hour, Elias sat in the last row and listened. Darren moved like every motion had been rehearsed in a mirror. He showed the class how to twist out of a wrist grab, how to step offline, how to make a shout sound bigger than fear. Some of it was harmless, some of it was useful, and some of it to Elias looked like a man teaching a storm to follow choreography. He did not judge it out loud. Old age had taught him that not every foolish thing required a witness. But then Darren wheeled out a gray table covered with knives, training knives, display knives, sleek black blades with skeleton handles, aggressive points, and names that sounded like midnight marketing. He lifted one between 2 fingers. "Modern defensive tools are light," Darren said. "Fast purpose built, they don't rely on nostalgia." A few people nodded. Darren's eyes moved across the room. Then they stopped on the back row on Elias, on the leather handle at his belt. A small smile pulled at the corner of Darren's mouth. The room felt it before it understood it. He had found a target. Darren walked closer, still smiling for the class. "And then," he said, "we have our gentleman in the back." Elias looked up. Darren pointed the training blade toward the old sheath. "What is that, sir?" "A marine knife," Elias said. His voice was dry and even. "What kind?" "Mark II." Darren gave a short laugh. "From what, the museum loaner program?" A few people laughed because they thought they were supposed to. Elias did not. "Pacific issue," he said. The laugh thinned. Darren turned toward the class as if he had been handed a gift. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Sentimental attachment to outdated equipment. Heavy blade, bad handle texture, poor modern retention profile, no modularity, no tactical advantage." He looked back at Elias. "May I see it?" "No." The word was quiet, but it landed harder than a shout. Darren blinked. "Sir, this is a safety class. I need to inspect anything sharp in the room." "It stays where it is." A woman in the second row, a nurse named Denise, who had been taking careful notes, shifted in her chair. "Maybe let him keep it," she said. "It looks important." Darren's smile did not reach his eyes. Important does not mean safe. He moved another step closer. "With respect, sir, if you're carrying a live blade in my class, I need to make sure you understand what it is and what it isn't." Elias looked at him for a long moment. The gym lights buzzed. Someone coughed. A chair leg scraped the floor. "What it is," Elias said, "is mine." Darren's face hardened. There it was, the small wound to public authority. A younger man with a microphone. An older man with one word. Darren lowered his voice, but not enough to keep the class from hearing. "Gee, hand it over, Grandpa." Elias's pale eyes lifted, not angry. Worse, clear. Darren reached toward the sheath. He did not get close enough to touch it. A voice from the side of the gym cut through the air. "Do not put your hand on that sheath." Every head turned. Near the equipment closet, a broad-shouldered woman in a plain navy jacket had risen from a folding chair. She had been quiet all morning. No logo, no badge, no need to announce herself. But the way she stood changed the room. Straight spine, level chin, the stillness of someone who had once given orders in places where hesitation cost lives. Darren frowned. "And you are?" Colonel Ruth called her. "United States Marine Corps, retired." She walked forward without hurry. Her eyes were not on Darren. They were on Elias's belt, on the old stacked leather handle, on the scars in the guard. When she stopped in front of Elias, her voice softened. "Sir, is that a Camillus contract blade?" Elias studied her face. Then he gave one slow nod. Blade stamps almost gone, pommels pinned. Still holding. Colonel Calder's expression changed, not surprise, recognition. The kind that comes when a stranger's burden suddenly has a shape. She turned to the room. What Mr. Cole just called outdated equipment was carried by Marines through some of the ugliest island fighting in American history. The Mark II was not designed to impress a class. It was built to work when rifles jammed. Crates needed opening. Wire needed cutting. And the distance between living and dying became smaller than a hallway. Darren opened his mouth. Calder did not look at him. "Don't." The word ended the attempt. She pointed to the knife without touching it. "Look at the handle. That leather is not slippery because it is old. It is dark because hands worked it into shape for years. Sweat, Salt, oil, rain, grit. A man did not carry a knife like that to make a statement. He carried it because it had already answered questions modern catalogs are still trying to sell. Elias lowered his eyes, for the first time that morning. Not weak, tired in the way old doors are tired after holding back too many storms. Colonel Calder looked at the dented pommel. Those marks aren't decoration. That knife has hammered tent stakes, cracked ration crates, struck metal in the dark, and probably done things no decent man brags about. She turned toward Darren. Her voice sharpened. You mistook restraint for ignorance. That is the most dangerous mistake in any training room. The class did not move. Darren's ears had gone red. I didn't mean disrespect, he said. Yes, Calder replied. You did. You just expected him to be too old to answer it. The sentence hung there. Elias could have left. Everyone in the room would have understood. He could have put one hand over the sheath, walked out under the humming lights, and let them sit with their shame. But Colonel Calder lowered her voice and asked the only Marine, with your permission, would you show this room what disciplined economy looks like? Elias looked at her, then at the rubber training dummy near the center mat, then at Darren, who suddenly looked much younger than he had 10 minutes earlier. No theatrics, Elias said. None, Calder answered. Slowly, Elias stood. The movement took effort. His knee protested. His back needed a moment to remember straightness. But once he was upright, something rearranged itself in the room. The old man did not become young. That would have been a cheap miracle. He became aligned. Shoulders settled. Feet found the floor. His breathing changed. The class saw, all at once, that age had taken speed from him. It had not taken structure. He walked to the dummy with the small, deliberate steps of a man who wasted nothing. Darren stepped aside. Elias did not look at him. His right hand dropped to the handle. The blade came free with a low whisper of leather on steel. No flourish, no spinning, no pose. Just a dark old knife in an old man's hand. Elias faced the rubber torso. He moved 3 times. That was all compact, ugly. Finished before the room knew how to breathe. Not fast like a video. Not pretty like a seminar. Efficient like a door closing. The dummy rocked once on its stand. Elias stopped with the blade held close to his body, controlled. Then he reversed the motion, wiped the flat of the blade against the dummy's canvas cover, and slid it back into the sheath. That small click seemed louder than all of Darren's microphone talk. No one clapped. No one laughed. The silence was too full for that. They had not seen violence. They had seen the absence of wasted motion. They had seen a language from a different century spoken in 3 quiet syllables. Colonel Calder stepped in front of Elias. For a second she was not a retired officer auditing a city training program. She was a Marine standing before another Marine. Her heels came together. Her shoulder. She raised her hand in a salute so clean it made the room straighten around her. Sir, it is an honor. Elias stared at her. His mouth trembled once. Then his right hand rose. It was not as crisp. It shook. But it carried more weight than any perfect motion in that gym. He returned the salute. A single tear ran down the deep line beside his nose. Not because he had been insulted. He had survived worse than a fool with a headset, because for one moment the room saw the men who were not there, the boys who had crossed black beaches with him. the ones who had slept under ponchos in rain that never stopped, the ones whose names had become letters in drawers, flags in glass cases, and memories old men carried because nobody else could. Denise stood first, not to applaud, just to stand. Then a man near the mats rose, then another. One by one, the whole class got to its feet. Darren stayed where he was, small inside his expensive shoes. Finally, he walked toward Elias. His voice cracked. "Mr. Mercer, I owe you an apology." Elias looked at him. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he answered, not cruelly, not kindly, but plainly, "You owe the next old man better eyes." Darren swallowed. Colonel Calder nodded once, as if that was the only lesson worth writing down. The seminar ended without announcement. People folded chairs quietly. The rubber dummy stood crooked on its base. The table of glossy modern knives looked suddenly like props from a play after the audience had gone home. At the door, Colonel Calder fell into step beside Elias. "Coffee?" she asked. Elias touched the sheath at his belt. The leather was warm under his palm. He looked toward the parking lot where morning sun had begun to burn through the cloudy glass doors. After a while he gave the smallest smile. "Only if it's bad coffee," he said. Calder smiled back. "The Marine Corps issued me plenty of training in that." They walked out together slowly, not as a hero and an admirer, not as a relic and a historian, as two Marines separated by years, joined by a truth the room had learned too late. Respect is not owed to age because age is fragile. Respect is owed because some quiet people are still carrying the weight of what kept the rest of us safe, and the loudest man in the room is not always the dangerous one. Sometimes the most dangerous man is the one who has already lived through the worst day of his life, and never needed to tell you